Welcome to this journey through one of the most chilling property mysteries in American history. Tell us where you're watching from now, because this story will unsettle you in a way few other accounts can. We're about to delve into a mystery that claimed 15 families across 8 decades, where a single tract of land in rural Pennsylvania defied all rational explanation and left a legacy so disturbing that real estate records were eventually sealed by court order. It was the year 1902. Theodore Roosevelt had just become the youngest president in American history. The Industrial Revolution was transforming cities into monuments of steel and steam. But in the remote valleys of northern Pennsylvania, in a region where the Allegheny Plateau carved itself into deep hollows and shadowed forests, progress moved slowly, very slowly. There, in Bradford County, approximately 12 miles southeast of the town of Towanda, sat a property that would become known, only in whispers, as the Harrow Place. 160 acres of prime farmland, rich soil, natural springs, dense hard wood forests perfect for logging. A gently sloping southern exposure ideal for crops. By every measurable standard, it was paradise for subsistence farming families seeking their piece of the American dream. The property had a house too, not a cabin, but a proper two-story farmhouse built in 1867 from local timber, with a stone foundation quarried from the nearby hills. 4 bedrooms upstairs, a kitchen with a functioning cast-iron stove, a root cellar dug deep into the hillside, a barn that could shelter livestock through the brutal Pennsylvania winters. On paper, it was everything a family could want. In reality, it was a place where families came to die. Between 1902 and 1981, 15 families attempted to make the Harrow Place their home. Not one of them stayed longer than 14 months. And of those 15 families comprising 63 individuals in total, 12 people died on that property. 12 deaths, 8 decades, one cursed piece of ground. The deaths were varied, some explainable, others absolutely not. This is not a story of a haunted house, though the house plays its role. This is not a tale of a single killer, though death certainly stalked those acres with methodical patience. This is something far more disturbing, a mystery that weaves together accident, madness, illness, and coincidence into a pattern so undeniable that it eventually forced authorities to take unprecedented action. What you're about to hear has been compiled from county records, newspaper archives, survivor testimonies, and legal documents, many of which were sealed for decades. We'll walk through each family's experience, trace the pattern that emerged, and examine the investigation that finally revealed a truth so unsettling that it challenges our understanding of how land itself can become contaminated. So settle in, turn off your lights if you dare, because we're about to explore ground where the earth remembers, and where the past refuses to stay buried. To understand the Harrow Place, you must first understand Bradford County in the early 20th century. This was Appalachian, Pennsylvania, not quite the coal country to the south, not quite the industrial belt to the east, but something in between. The region was characterized by steep forested ridges, narrow valleys where morning mist lingered until noon, and communities so isolated that some families went weeks without seeing another soul outside their immediate kin. The soil here was glacial till, deposited 10,000 years ago when ice sheets retreated northward. It was rich in nutrients, well-draining, perfect for corn, wheat, and hay. The forests were virgin-growth white pine, hemlock, maple, and oak trees that had stood for centuries. Deer were abundant. Streams ran clear and cold, teeming with brook trout. By all geological and agricultural assessments, this was prime real estate. The property that would become the Harrow Place was originally part of a land grant issued in 1794 to a Revolutionary War veteran named Josiah Harrow. Josiah cleared 40 acres, built the first structure, a log cabin, and raised 7 children there. He died peacefully in 1843 at the age of 87. His descendants farmed the land for another 2 decades before the last of the Harrow line, a grandson named Thomas, perished in the Civil War at Gettysburg. The property sat vacant from 1865 to 1867. In the spring of 1867, a lumber merchant named Otto Vandermeer purchased the land at auction. Vandermeer had ambitions. He tore down the original cabin and constructed the two-story farmhouse using lumber from his own mills, the finest hardwood, properly seasoned, joined with precision. He spared no expense. The house had glass windows, not oiled paper, proper doors with iron hinges, a stone fireplace in the main room that drew beautifully, heating the entire first floor. Otto Vandermeer lived there for 35 years. This detail is crucial. For 3.5 decades, Otto farmed those acres, raised his family, buried his wife in the small family plot on the eastern edge of the property, and eventually grew old watching his grandchildren play in the same fields where he'd once planted his first corn crop. When Otto died in 1902, peacefully, in his sleep, at the age of 73, his children decided to sell. None of them wanted to farm. They'd moved to Towanda, to Scranton, to Philadelphia. The rural life held no appeal for them. They wanted the property liquidated and the money divided. The estate sale was handled by a local attorney named Silas Moreland. The asking price was modest $300 for 160 acres, house, barn, and outbuildings. A bargain, really, for such a well-maintained property. The first buyer was a family named Kettering. James and Sarah Kettering had 5 children ranging in age from 3 to 14. They'd been sharecroppers on a larger farm near Sayre, saving every penny for 7 years to afford their own land. When they heard about the Harrow Place, they saw answered prayers. They moved in on April 12, 1902. The first month was idyllic. James wrote to his brother, "The land is everything we hoped for. Sarah has planted a garden that's already showing sprouts. The children run wild in the forests, and I've never seen them happier. We are blessed beyond measure." On May 23, 1902, their youngest child, 3-year-old Emma, wandered away from the house while Sarah was preparing dinner. The family searched frantically for 2 hours before James found her floating face, down in the spring-fed pond on the western edge of the property. The pond was shallow, less than 3 feet deep. Emma could walk. She should have been able to stand up, to climb out, to call for help. She drowned anyway. The coroner ruled it an accidental death. These things happened, especially with young children. Tragedy, but not unusual for the era. The Ketterings were devastated. Sarah fell into a depression so profound that she stopped speaking. James threw himself into work, clearing more land, building fences, anything to keep his mind occupied. On July 4th, during a community gathering, a rare moment of joy, their eldest son, 14-year-old William, was showing younger children how to use the rope swing that hung from a massive oak tree. Near the barn, the rope snapped. William fell 20 feet onto exposed rocks at the tree's base. His neck broke instantly. 2 children dead in less than 6 weeks. The Ketterings left the property on July 8, 1902. They abandoned everything: furniture, tools, livestock. Sarah had to be carried to the wagon. James never spoke about the Harrow Place again. According to his brother's letters, James took work on the railroad and died in a switching yard accident in 1904. Sarah lived until 1900. 1911. But those who knew her said she'd died years earlier. Her body simply hadn't realized it yet. The property sat empty for 3 months before the next family arrived. The Grimshaws, Henry and Martha, with their 2 teenage daughters, purchased the property in October 1902 for $200, a reduction from the original asking price that should have raised questions but didn't. They were British immigrants, new to America, unfamiliar with local history or gossip. They lasted 11 months. The first winter was brutal. Pennsylvania winters always were, but the 1902-1903 season was particularly savage. Temperatures dropped below zero for weeks at a time. Snowdrifts reached the second-story windows. The Grimshaws were isolated, cut off from Towanda, surviving on their root cellar stores and what game Henry could shoot in the nearby woods. Martha began to complain of nightmares. According to her daughter Eleanor's diary, discovered decades later in a Scranton attic, Martha claimed she could hear children crying in the middle of the night. She would wake, convinced she heard small feet running through the upstairs hallway, but when she investigated, the house was always empty and silent. Henry dismissed it as winter madness, cabin fever, a common affliction. In March 1903, when the snow finally began to melt, Henry was working in the barn when several boards in the loft floor gave way. He fell 15 feet onto farm equipment below, a rusted harrow, an old agricultural tool with sharp metal tines used for breaking up soil, pierced through his abdomen. Martha and the girls heard his screams. They found him impaled, still alive, begging them to pull him off. But the barbs were designed to dig deeper with any movement. Martha ran for help, leaving her daughters with their dying father. By the time she returned with the town, Dr. Henry Grimshaw had been dead for an hour. The family left the next day. According to Eleanor's diary, Mother will not spend another night on that cursed ground. She says the land is hungry. She says it wants us all. The property sat vacant again. 6 months this time. Word was spreading quietly, carefully. 2 families, 3 deaths. Bad luck, people said. Terrible coincidence. These things happened. But farmers are practical people. Superstitious, perhaps, but practical. And they began to notice that birds didn't nest near the Harrow farmhouse, that the deer trails which crisscrossed the county seemed to avoid those particular 160 acres, that the old-timers in Towanda would fall silent when someone mentioned buying the Vandermeer estate. Still, land was land, and $300, now reduced to $150, was a price that made desperate men ignore common sense. Between 1904 and 1924, 8 more families attempted to make the Harrow Place their home. Each followed the same arc: hope, settlement, calamity, flight. The Pritchards, a family of 6, moved in during the summer of 1904. The father, Robert Pritchard, was a cooper by trade, a barrel maker who thought he could farm and practice his craft. They made it 9 months before their barn burned down with 3 cows and 2 horses trapped inside. The fire started inexplicably in the middle of a rainstorm. Robert's hands were badly burned trying to free the animals. The family left within the week, Robert unable to work his trade anymore. The Mulligans came in 1906, Irish immigrants with 9 children and more optimism than sense. They lasted 14 months, the longest tenure yet. During that time, 2 children contracted diphtheria and died. The water well became contaminated with something that made the entire family violently ill for weeks, and Mrs. Mulligan suffered a miscarriage so traumatic that the local doctor advised them to leave before that cursed land takes more from you. The Hoffmans tried in 1908. 3 months. The husband disappeared while hunting in the woods on the property. Search parties found his rifle and his coat hanging on a tree branch, but no sign of the man himself. He simply vanished. His body was never recovered. The Blackwoods came in 1910, 7 months. Their youngest son, a boy of 6, fell down the root cellar stairs and died from head injuries. But the stairs were straight and shallow. How did he fall? No one could explain it. His older sister claimed she saw someone push him, but she was alone with him at the time, and she was only 8 years old. Her testimony was dismissed. The Carters, the Douglases, the Newberrys, the Spence family, each one came with dreams and left with trauma. By 1924, the property had gained a reputation. The price had dropped to $75. No one local would touch it. The real estate listings had to reach out to Pittsburgh, to Philadelphia, to New York, targeting immigrants and city dwellers who didn't know the land's history. That's when Samuel and Rebecca Thornton arrived. Previous, though no one could name these families with certainty, Samuel was an educated man, a former teacher who'd lost his position during budget cuts and decided to try his hand at farming. Rebecca was a nurse. They had one child, a daughter named Alice, who was 12 years old. Samuel was methodical. Before purchasing the property, he did something none of the previous families had done. He researched it. He went to the county courthouse and pulled every record. He interviewed the previous owners he could find. He documented the deaths, the accidents, the strange occurrences. And he concluded that while the pattern was statistically unusual, it could be explained by a combination of poor maintenance, bad luck, and the hazards inherent to rural farming life in the early 20th century. Samuel Thornton believed in reason, in cause and effect, in the power of careful observation and scientific method. He bought the property in June 1924 for $60. The first thing he did was conduct a thorough inspection of every structure. He found that the barn had structural issues, rotted support beams that previous owners had ignored. He tore it down and rebuilt it properly. He examined the house from foundation to roof. He tested the well water and found it was indeed contaminated with runoff from the root cellar. He dug a new well 40 feet away and capped the old one. He cleared the pond where little Emma Kettering had drowned and found that it had a peculiar underwater configuration, a depression in the center that created a whirlpool effect when the spring fed water into it. He drained it partially and filled the depression with rocks. Samuel Thornton found rational explanations for everything. He kept meticulous journals, ledgers in which he recorded daily temperatures, crop yields, animal health, family activities, and anything unusual. These journals survived and provide an invaluable record of what happened next. From June through October 1924, life at the Harrow Place was peaceful. Samuel's methodical approach seemed to be working. The crops grew, the animals thrived. Rebecca established a small medicinal garden. Alice attended the school in town and made friends. Samuel wrote in his journal, "We are proving that superstition is merely the refuge of the ignorant. This land is no different from any other. It requires only proper stewardship and rational management." Then winter came. The first incident was small. In early November, Rebecca reported hearing footsteps in the upstairs hallway at night. Samuel investigated and found nothing. He noted in his journal, experiencing auditory hallucinations, likely due to the wind, which creates unusual sounds in the eaves, have explained the acoustic principles to her. 2 weeks later, Alice claimed she saw a child's face in her bedroom window, a little girl with dark hair and sad eyes. Samuel examined the window and found frost patterns that could create the illusion of a face in certain light conditions. He explained pareidolia to A. She seems satisfied with the explanation. But the incidents continued and escalated. Objects moved, not dramatically, no poltergeist theatrics, but consistently. Tools left in the barn would appear in the house. Kitchen implements would migrate from drawer to drawer. Rebecca's medical supplies would be rearranged in patterns she didn't recognize. Samuel remained rational. He theorized that they were moving things themselves and forgetting due to the monotony of winter isolation. He implemented a system. Everything had a specific place, and they would all consciously note when they moved anything. The system failed within a week. On December 15, 1924, Samuel recorded, "Something is wrong here. I resist superstitious explanations, but I cannot deny the evidence before me. This morning I found all of the furniture in Alice's room had been rearranged during the night, moved into a circular pattern with her bed in the center. Alice is a sound sleeper, but she insists she heard nothing. Neither Rebecca nor I left our room. The doors were locked from the inside. I have no rational explanation. The temperature in the house began to fluctuate wildly. Some rooms would be freezing while others were warm. Samuel checked the fireplace, the stove, the window seals. Everything was functioning properly. Yet Alice's room on the east side of the second floor remained cold no matter how much they heated it. Cold enough to see breath, cold enough that frost formed on the interior walls. Rebecca's nightmares became severe. She dreamed of children drowning, children falling, children dying in countless horrific ways. She would wake screaming. Samuel noted, R.'s mental state deteriorating. I am concerned about prolonged winter isolation effects. Must consider leaving if conditions do not improve. On Christmas Eve, Alice disappeared. She went to bed at her normal time. Rebecca checked on her at 10 o'clock. The girl was asleep. When Samuel went to wake her on Christmas morning, her bed was empty. They searched the house frantically. Every room, every closet, the attic, the root cellar, nothing. Samuel ran outside in his nightclothes. Fresh snow had fallen during the night, 6 inches of pristine white covering the property. There were no tracks leading away from the house. None. The snow was undisturbed except for Samuel's own footprints as he circled the building. Rebecca was hysterical. Samuel was fighting panic. He ran to town, a 3-mile journey through snow, to get help. A search party of 20 men arrived by noon. They searched the house again, the barn, the outbuildings, the woods, the frozen pond. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, one of the searchers opened the door to the root cellar and called out. Alice was there. She was sitting on the floor in her nightgown, surrounded by preserved jars, calm and quiet in the near-freezing temperature. Alice, Rebecca sobbed, rushing down the stairs. Where have you been? We've been searching for hours. Alice looked at her mother with a strange, distant expression. I've been with the other children, she said. They wanted me to play. The men exchanged glances. Samuel descended into the cellar and carried his daughter out. She was hypothermic, but otherwise unharmed. Rebecca wrapped her in blankets. The doctor was summoned, but Alice's explanation never changed. There are children here, she told the doctor. Lots of children. They're cold, and they want us to stay with them. They don't want to be alone anymore. The doctor examined her and found no physical injuries, no signs of trauma beyond the cold exposure. He privately told Samuel that the girl might be suffering from a dissociative episode, a psychological response to stress or fear. But Samuel had found something in the root cellar, something the search party hadn't noticed in their relief at finding Alice alive. Scratched into the earthen floor, in marks that looked fresh, were names. Emma, William, David, Jonathan. He recognized 2 of them. Emma and William, the Kettering children who died in 1902. Samuel Thornton's faith in rationality was shattered. They left the Harrow Place on December 27, 1924. Samuel donated the property to the county, refusing any payment. In his final journal entry, he wrote, "I came here believing that all phenomena could be explained through reason and observation. I leave knowing that some places retain memory, not in any metaphysical sense, but as if tragedy itself becomes imprinted on the land, creating conditions that perpetuate further tragedy. Whether through psychological influence, environmental factors I failed to identify, or something beyond current scientific understanding, this place is dangerous. No family should ever live here again. But families did. Because the county eager to collect property, taxes put the land back on the market within 6 months. By 1960, the Harrow Place had been home to 13 families. 9 people had died there, and a young journalist named Margaret Chen was starting to notice a pattern. Margaret worked for the Towanda Daily Review, a small town newspaper that typically covered agricultural reports, school board meetings, and social events. But Margaret was ambitious. She'd studied journalism at Penn State and had dreams of working for the Philadelphia Inquirer or the New York Times. She just needed the right story. She found it in the county property records. Margaret was researching a piece about agricultural land values when she noticed something odd. One particular property in southeastern Bradford County had been sold 18 times in 58 years, the same 160 acres, changing hands every few years, sometimes multiple times in a single decade. Properties didn't behave like that. Farm families bought land and held it for generations. This pattern was anomalous. She pulled every record related to the property: sales records, tax assessments, insurance claims, death certificates. What she found stunned her. The death rate on that specific property was 40 times higher than the county average. 9 confirmed deaths over 6 decades: drownings, falls, accidents, 1 disappearance. But beyond the deaths, there were dozens of insurance claims: barn fires, livestock deaths, structural collapses, contaminated water supplies, equipment failures. Margaret did what Samuel Thornton had done 36 years earlier. She tracked down the survivors. She found Eleanor Grimshaw, now Eleanor McAllister, living in Scranton. Eleanor was 70 years old, but she remembered the Harrow Place vividly. "My father died on that land," Eleanor told Margaret. "Died screaming, impaled on farming equipment that shouldn't have fallen, on a floor that had been solid the day before. But it was more than his death, that place. It got inside your head. My mother heard children crying every night. I heard them too, though I never told her because I was afraid. They weren't our imaginations, Miss Chen. That land wanted us gone, and it didn't care how it accomplished that." Margaret found Robert Pritchard Jr., son of the barrel maker whose hands had been burned. Robert was working as a carpenter in Williamsport. "My father's burns never healed right," Robert said. "Not just physically. The scars were bad enough, but he changed after we left that place. He'd wake up screaming. He'd stare at his hands like they belonged to someone else. He hanged himself in 1910. I was 16. The coroner ruled it suicide, but I've always believed that place killed him just as surely as if he'd never left." She found surviving members of 6 other families. Each interview revealed similar patterns: escalating incidents, psychological deterioration, a sense of being watched, of being unwanted, of the land itself pushing them away. But the most disturbing interview was with Jacob Mulligan, who'd been 12 years old when his family lived at the Harrow Place in 1906. Jacob was 76 now, living in a veteran's home in Pittsburgh. He'd served in World War I and had seen horrors in the trenches of France. But when Margaret asked about the Harrow Place, His hands began to shake. "That place has children in it," Jacob said. "I don't mean ghosts, not exactly. I mean the land remembers every child who died there. It collects them, and it wants more. My brother and sister died of diphtheria while we lived there, both within a week of each other, but before they got sick, they changed. They stopped playing with the rest of us. They'd go off alone, and when you asked where they'd been, they'd say they were playing with the others. What others, we'd ask. The ones who live in the ground, they'd say. After they died, my mother insisted we leave. But here's the thing that still gives me nightmares when we were packing up to go. I went down to the root cellar one last time, and in the dirt floor someone had drawn faces, dozens of faces, child faces. Some of them looked like my brother and sister. Margaret compiled all of this into a feature article titled The Property That Kills. It ran in the Towanda Daily Review in August 1960. The article generated immediate controversy. The county commissioners were furious. The property was county-owned at the time. It had reverted after the most recent family abandoned it, and Margaret's article made it essentially unsaleable. Property values in the surrounding area began to drop. Local real estate agents accused her of sensationalism, but the article caught the attention of someone important, Dr. Edwin Blackwell, a professor of geology at Penn State University. Dr. Blackwell wrote to Margaret and proposed something unprecedented, a scientific investigation of the property. He wanted to conduct geological surveys, soil tests, air quality measurements, and structural analysis to determine if there were environmental factors that could explain the pattern of deaths and accidents. The county, desperate to rehabilitate the property's reputation, agreed. Dr. Blackwell's team arrived in September 1960 with equipment that seemed exotic to the rural community: soil coring devices, air sampling instruments, radiation detectors, and seismographs. They spent 3 weeks conducting the most thorough analysis of any residential property in Pennsylvania history. What they found was disturbing, though not in the way anyone expected. The geology was unusual. The property sat above a complex network of limestone caverns, part of the same karst topography that characterized much of central Pennsylvania, but these particular caverns had an abnormal concentration of radon gas seeping up through fissures in the bedrock. Radon, a radioactive noble gas produced by the decay of uranium in soil and rock, colorless, odorless, tasteless, and lethal in high concentrations. Dr. Blackwell's measurements showed radon levels in the farmhouse basement that were 30 times higher than the EPA action level, though the EPA didn't exist yet in 1960, so there were no regulations or awareness of the danger. But radon exposure caused lung cancer, not accidents. It didn't explain drownings or falls or barn collapses. Dr. Blackwell kept digging. The water table beneath the property was contaminated with naturally occurring arsenic, leaching from geological formations deep underground. The old well, despite Samuel Thornton's efforts to cap it, was still allowing contaminated groundwater to seep into the surrounding soil. Arsenic exposure caused neurological symptoms: confusion, hallucinations, tremors, seizures. The cavern network beneath the property made the ground structurally unstable. Ground-penetrating radar revealed that portions of the land were essentially hollow, suspended over voids that could collapse without warning. The barn had been built directly above one such void. So had the oak tree with the rope swing. The house itself, Dr. Blackwell found, had been constructed using timber from trees that grew on the property. And something about the soil chemistry, he suspected the high arsenic content, had caused those trees to accumulate abnormal levels of heavy metals. When Otto Vandermeer milled them into lumber and built his house, he'd essentially constructed a dwelling from toxic materials. Over decades of temperature fluctuations, those heavy metals would be released into the air as microscopic particles. Inhaling them could cause cognitive impairment, mood disturbances, and hallucinations. Dr. Blackwell's report was damning. The property contains multiple environmental hazards that, in combination, create conditions highly dangerous to human habitation. The radon exposure alone would be sufficient to recommend permanent evacuation. The arsenic contamination, structural instability, and toxic building materials compound these risks to an extent that I have never encountered in 30 years of geological survey work. This property should be condemned and removed from residential use immediately. The county had no choice. In November 1960, they officially condemned the Harrow Place. But the story didn't end there, because while Dr. Blackwell's findings explained many things, the confusion, the hallucinations, the structural failures, they didn't explain everything. They didn't explain Alice Thornton's appearance in a locked root cellar with no footprints in fresh snow. They didn't explain the names scratched into the earthen floor. They didn't explain the consistent reports of children, specifically children being heard, seen, or encountered across 6 decades by multiple unrelated families who had no knowledge of previous incidents. Margaret Chen wasn't satisfied. Neither was a small but growing group of people who believed the Harrow Place was more than just environmentally hazardous. In 1962, a paranormal research group from Philadelphia requested permission to investigate the property. The county refused. The property was fenced off, posted with warning signs, and placed under legal restriction. But people found ways in: urban explorers, thrill seekers, paranormal investigators. They would cut the fence, spend a night in the abandoned farmhouse, and leave with stories that were remarkably consistent. The sound of children playing, the sensation of being watched, the overwhelming feeling that they were not wanted there. Some left with more than stories. In 1967, 3 teenagers from Towanda broke into the property on a dare. One of them, a 17-year-old named Martin Cross, fell through the rotted floor of the 2nd story and impaled his leg on a broken floor joist. His friends managed to get him to the hospital, but the injury became infected. Martin developed sepsis. The infection reached his heart. He died 2 weeks later. In 1973, a paranormal investigator named Dennis Rourke spent 3 nights alone in the farmhouse. He brought recording equipment, cameras, and temperature sensors. On the 3rd night, something happened that Rourke never fully explained. He fled the property at dawn and drove straight to the state police barracks, babbling about children in the walls and hands reaching from the floor. Rourke's recording equipment showed anomalous electromagnetic fluctuations. His photographs captured strange orbs and shadows. The temperature sensors showed localized cold spots that defied physical explanation. But Rourke himself was never the same. He stopped investigating the paranormal entirely. When Margaret Chen tried to interview him in 1974, he refused to discuss the Harrow Place. Leave it alone. He told her, that land has had its fill of death. Don't give it any more attention. Don't send any more people there. Just leave it alone. The turning point came in 1981. A developer from Philadelphia, a man named Leonard Vasquez, who specialized in troubled properties, approached the county with a proposal. He wanted to purchase the Harrow Place, demolish all structures, and subdivide the land into smaller residential lots. He'd done similar projects before, turning notorious properties into profitable developments by erasing their histories and starting fresh. The county was interested. The property had been a liability for 2 decades. The fence required maintenance. Trespassers were a constant problem, and every year, someone would file a Freedom of Information request for the property records, generating unwanted publicity. Leonard Vasquez offered $20,000, a substantial sum, for condemned land. The county board scheduled a vote for April 1981. Margaret Chen, now 61 years old, and the managing editor of the Towanda Daily Review, launched a campaign against the sale. She published a series of articles documenting every death, every incident, every warning sign that had been ignored over the decades. She was joined by Dr. Edwin Blackwell, who testified before the county board that the environmental hazards had not been remediated and that constructing new residences on the property would be criminally negligent. But the most powerful testimony came from an unexpected source, Victoria Spence, the last person to have lived on the Harrow Place as a child. Victoria had been 6 years old when her family moved to the property in 1958. They'd lasted 5 months before her mother had a complete psychological breakdown and her father loaded them all into the car and drove away in the middle of the night. Victoria was now 29. She was a social worker in Scranton, and she came to the county board meeting with a statement that silenced the room. "I am here to tell you that if you sell this property to be developed, you will be responsible for future deaths, not metaphorically, not hypothetically, literally responsible." I was 6 years old, but I remember everything. I remember the children who came to my window at night. I remember their voices in the walls. I remember finding my mother unconscious in the root cellar after she'd gone looking for them. The doctors said she'd had a seizure, but I know what really happened. That place took her mind because it couldn't take her life. You have scientific reports telling you the land is contaminated. You have 80 years of documented tragedy. You have survivor testimony from multiple families spanning 3 generations. At what point does a pattern become undeniable? This isn't about superstition or ghost stories. This is about a piece of ground that has killed or damaged every single person who tried to live there. Whether it's geology, psychology, toxicology, or something else entirely, does it matter? The result is the same. Don't sell this land. Don't build on it. Don't let anyone else suffer what my family suffered. The room was silent when she finished. The county board voted 4-1 against the sale, but they went further. Prompted by Margaret Chen's articles and the public attention they generated, the board commissioned a comprehensive historical review of the property. They hired a law firm to examine liability issues, and they consulted with the State Attorney General's office about options for permanently removing the property from potential development. The resulting legal action was unprecedented in Pennsylvania history. In August 1981, the Bradford County Board of Commissioners filed a petition in state court to have the property declared a public hazard zone under an obscure provision of Pennsylvania law that had been written to deal with abandoned mine shafts and industrial contamination sites. The petition cited Dr. Blackwell's 1960 geological survey showing multiple environmental hazards, the documented death toll, 12 confirmed deaths across 79 years, testimony from survivors and their descendants, the statistical impossibility of the accident rate being purely coincidental, the continued risk to trespassers and potential future occupants, the failure of any remediation attempts to make the property safe. The state court held hearings throughout the fall of 1981. Leonard Vasquez mounted vigorous opposition, arguing that property rights were being violated and that superstition was trumping legitimate economic development. His attorney called Dr. Blackwell's findings into question, hiring a competing geological expert who claimed the radon and arsenic levels were manageable with modern construction techniques and proper remediation. But the judge, a 68-year-old jurist named Harold Pemberton, who'd lived in Bradford County his entire life, had heard the stories. More importantly, he'd read the complete historical record that Margaret Chen had compiled. On December 18, 1981, Judge Pemberton issued a ruling that sent shockwaves through Pennsylvania legal circles. This court finds that the property known as the Harrow Place, comprising 160 acres in southeastern Bradford County, represents a clear and continuing danger to public safety. While scientific evidence supports the presence of environmental contamination, the historical record demonstrates a pattern of tragedy that extends beyond any single explanatory factor. Whether one attributes this pattern to geological hazards, psychological effects, or causes not yet understood by modern science, the result is undeniable. This land has proven consistently and persistently lethal to human habitation. The court cannot, in good conscience, allow this property to be developed for residential use. To do so would be to willfully expose future residents to documented dangers, making the county, and potentially this court, complicit in any subsequent tragedies. Therefore, the property is hereby declared a permanent public hazard zone. It shall be maintained in perpetuity by Bradford County as undeveloped land. All structures shall be demolished within 6 months. The property shall be fenced and monitored. Access shall be restricted to authorized researchers only. Property records shall be sealed, accessible only by court order, to prevent future exploitation or sensationalism. This is not a decision I make lightly. Property rights are fundamental to American law. But the right to property must be balanced against the duty to protect human life. In this case, that balance compels only one conclusion: the Harrow Place must never be inhabited again. The ruling was upheld on appeal in 1982. In March 1982, county work crews demolished the farmhouse, the barn, and all remaining structures. The rubble was buried on site in a designated landfill area. The wells were permanently sealed. The entire property was surrounded by an 8-foot chain link fence topped with barbed wire. Signs were posted every 100 feet. Condemned property, no trespassing. Bradford County Public Hazard Zone violators will be prosecuted. Margaret Chen wrote one final article about the Harrow Place, published on April 15, 1982. After 80 years of tragedy, the land where families never stayed has finally been given the only designation that makes sense: uninhabitable. Judge Pemberton's ruling represents a triumph of common sense over greed, of historical awareness over convenient amnesia. 12 people died on this land, dozens more were psychologically scarred, 15 families were destroyed. The pattern was undeniable, yet it took decades for authorities to acknowledge what should have been obvious after the first few incidents. Some places are simply not meant for human habitation. The Harrow Place will now stand as a memorial, not with monuments or plaques, but through absence: empty land where once stood a house, silence where once were children's voices, a fence marking the boundary between the living and whatever dwells in that cursed ground. May it remain empty forever. The Harrow Place has remained empty for 43 years. The fence still stands, though sections have been replaced multiple times. The county sends maintenance crews twice a year to check the barriers and remove any new growth that might obscure the warning signs. Trespassing incidents have declined but not stopped entirely. In 2003, 2 college students from Penn State were arrested after camping on the property overnight. They claimed they were conducting research for a documentary. The judge fined them $500 each and banned them from Bradford County for 2 years. In 2011, a paranormal investigation television show attempted to get permission to film on the property. The county commissioners denied the request unanimously. The show threatened legal action, but ultimately dropped the matter when their attorneys reviewed Judge Pemberton's ruling and realized they had no chance of success. Margaret Chen died in 2004 at the age of 84. Her obituary in the Towanda Daily Review devoted 3 paragraphs to her investigation of the Harrow Place, noting that her work had saved countless lives by forcing authorities to confront uncomfortable truth. Dr. Edwin Blackwell continued his geological research until his retirement in 1985. Before he died in 1998, he published one final paper about the Harrow Place in the Journal of Environmental Geology. The abstract read, "The confluence of geological hazards at the Bradford County site represents a near-perfect storm of environmental dangers. Radon exposure, arsenic contamination, structural instability, and toxic building materials combine to create conditions that would impair judgment, cause hallucinations, and increase accident risk exponentially. However, certain reported phenomena remain unexplained by current scientific models. Further research is warranted, though access restrictions make such research impractical." That final sentence, "certain reported phenomena remain unexplained," represents the most candid admission from a mainstream scientist that something about the Harrow Place defies conventional understanding. Victoria Spence, who testified so powerfully in 1981, became a prominent advocate for environmental health and safety. She founded a nonprofit organization that helps families identify and escape toxic housing situations. She's given presentations across the country about environmental hazards and their psychological effects. But she's never returned to Bradford County. In a 2015 interview, she said, "I have nightmares about that place to this day. Not dramatic nightmares, no monsters or chase scenes. Just dreams where I'm back in that house, and I hear children calling my name, asking me to come play, and I know in the dream, that if I go to them, I'll never leave. I wake up terrified every single time. I'm 57 years old, and that place still has hooks in my mind." The property records remain sealed, as Judge Pemberton ordered. Researchers who want access must petition the court and demonstrate legitimate academic or scientific purpose. Over the past 40 years, only 7 such petitions have been granted. One of those petitions was filed in 2019 by a team from MIT Department of Environmental Studies. They wanted to conduct a comprehensive survey using modern technology, ground-penetrating radar, 3D imaging, air quality sensors far more sophisticated than what Dr. Blackwell had available in 1960. The county granted permission for a non-invasive survey from outside the fence line. The MIT team's report, published in 2020, confirmed Dr. Blackwell's findings and added new details. The radon levels had actually increased over 6 decades. The limestone caverns beneath the property were more extensive than previously thought. A network spanning nearly a mile in all directions, with the Harrow Place sitting directly above the largest chamber, but the MIT team also noted something curious. The property had distinctive electromagnetic anomalies, fluctuations in the local magnetic field that couldn't be fully explained by geological formations. These anomalies were strongest in 3 locations: where the farmhouse had stood, where the old oak tree with the rope swing had been, and near the spring-fed pond. The same 3 locations where 5 of the 12 deaths had occurred. The lead researcher, Dr. Anita Sorensen, concluded her report with a statement that would have made Dr. Blackwell proud. "Environmental hazards alone cannot account for the complete historical pattern at this site. While contamination and structural instability created dangerous conditions, consistency and specificity of tragic outcomes suggest additional factors worthy of investigation. However, current scientific frameworks may be insufficient to fully explain this phenomenon. We recommend the site remain permanently restricted, both for public safety and as a location for future study should new methodologies emerge. Today, the Harrow Place sits empty. From the road, you can barely see it. The fence is obscured by trees that have grown tall in the decades since demolition. The warning signs are faded but still legible. Local residents don't talk about it much. When they do, It's usually in the context of explaining to newcomers why that particular stretch of land, prime acreage in an area where farmland is valuable, remains undeveloped. That's the Harrow Place, they'll say, and usually that's enough. The name carries weight, history, warning, but on certain nights, when the wind comes down from the mountains and the moon is dark, people who live near the property report sounds. Not loud sounds, not dramatic sounds, just the soft, distant echo of children playing, laughing, calling out to each other in games whose rules were forgotten long ago. And in the morning, county workers will sometimes find the fence damaged, not cut or torn, but pushed outward, as if something inside wanted out. They repair the fence, they file their reports, they don't ask too many questions, because some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. Some places aren't meant to be understood. They're meant to be avoided, remembered, and respected. The Harrow Place has claimed enough victims. 12 lives lost, 15 families destroyed, countless others scarred by brief encounters with whatever dwells in that cursed ground. The fence stands, the warning signs remain, the land lies empty. And the children, those who died there, those who were born from that toxic soil, those who exist in whatever liminal space between memory and reality, they wait. They've been waiting since 1902. They'll wait forever, if necessary, because land doesn't forget. Tragedy leaves an imprint. And some places, once marked by death, become hungry for more. The story of the Harrow Place remains a disturbing reminder that sometimes patterns emerge that defy our comfortable explanations. Whether you believe the tragedy stemmed from environmental contamination alone, or whether you suspect something deeper and darker at work, the result is undeniable. 15 families tried to build their lives on that land, and 15 families were broken by it. But questions remain. What exactly did Samuel Thornton's daughter encounter in that root cellar? Why did the incidents always center on children? And what about those electromagnetic anomalies that modern science can measure but not explain? To this day, the Harrow Place stands empty behind its rusted fence, a 160-acre wound in the Pennsylvania landscape. County maintenance records note that vegetation grows poorly within the fence line. The soil yields crops normally outside the boundaries, but remains stubbornly barren where the farmhouse once stood. And on silent nights, when fog rolls through the valleys and the temperature drops, people still report hearing what sounds like children playing in fields that haven't seen a child's laughter in over 40 years. If this journey through one of Pennsylvania's darkest property mysteries resonated with you, if you find yourself pondering the thin line between environmental catastrophe and something more inexplicable, then consider subscribing to the Untold Hour. There are many more stories waiting to be told, mysteries buried in county records and family secrets that deserve to be examined with the care they merit. Leave a like if this account provoked reflections that go beyond mere entertainment, and comment sharing your own perspectives on this question. When does a pattern of tragedy become undeniable, and who bears responsibility when warnings are ignored? Until next time, remember that not all horror requires supernatural explanation. Sometimes the most terrifying mysteries are the ones where science and reason can only take us partway toward understanding. The ground remembers, and some debts are never fully paid.